together culture has grown into what it is today, which is the membership organization. And it is a group of people who use this space and they participate in developing skills, and a lot of skills that have to do with community organizing, listening, learning how to disagree productively, decision making. And each and every year we do a big co-creation, and through that co-creation come up with ideas to be able to take action to build community power to make Cambridge a more inclusive and ecological place. And one of the things that came out of last year was we would really love to better understand not just the history, but the heritage of this place we've come to call the Kite. What is it all about? And so that's how we dreamt up this idea of doing a big oral history project. We began working with Anglia-Ruskin University, and in particular the Story Lab, which uses wonderful technology to be able to bring heritage to life. And we started working with the Cambridge Room, and the Cambridge Room is working on finding all sorts of ways to make the planning process more democratic, to get more people actively involved in it. And so hundreds of people have actually been involved in getting us this far and sharing their stories. And each and every one of you here today who's decided to come and participate in this conversation, well, mwahaha, you're part of the process too. So when we started taking these oral histories, a lot of people, not surprisingly, wanted to talk about town and gown, a phrase that people have used repeatedly in the conversations and in the stories that we've listened to. And there were three main topics that people really wanted to dig into when they started talking about town and gown. They were talking about land quite a bit. They were talking about power quite a bit, and change. And so yesterday we had a conversation with a group of people on the topic of land, just trying to understand how did the Kite come to be? How was it built in the first place? And who made those decisions? So that conversation took part partially here and then partially at Jesus College. So we tried to understand from the perspective of who was making decisions about land, both, I was about to say sides, but all of the different people who were in the position of holding power and able to make decisions. How did it come to be? And I know some of you will have had conversations with Charles Humphrey, who through the space-time continuum has been able to come back and to join us. And Charles was a prominent figure in Cambridge round about the time the Enclosures Acts happened. And those of you who know your story or your history will know that when the Enclosures Acts actually happened, that meant a lot of people who were living in this region, in particular in the Fens, needed to find a new livelihood because the Fens were drained. So their way of life wasn't viable any longer. And at the same time the Enclosures Acts happened around 1811, the university was rapidly expanding. It's an interesting time, right? The Industrial Revolution taking off. There were new subjects to study. There were new things to build and to create. And so Cambridge was expanding as an educational institution. There were new subject matters to study. And so as Cambridge grew, Cambridge also needed more people to do the working class jobs to make the university run. And so those things came together and the Kite was built. And Midsummer Common was partially drained to be the green area, the park area that it is today. And it served really helpfully for a lot of the industry that was happening within the Kite. It was a great place to be able to transport materials. And so that was the origins. That was the beginning of how the land was transformed and the Kite was able to emerge. And there were a number of different landholders, and there were a number of, not only the university, and there were a number of people who were interested in the opportunity that building property on that land provided. And so that brings us to the kite. That's the background of what we learned yesterday. And I know some of you were involved in that conversation. Today, we're going to have the second conversation, which is a conversation about power. And the power to make decisions and the power to affect what comes. As this is a heritage project, one of the key things we've really been looking at is what happens in our minds if we stop thinking of the past, the present, and the future as different siloed places in time. What if we think of the present as a bridge between the past and the future? And what we've come to believe is that if you think of the present as this place where we're sort of shaping the future and we're informed by what's come before us, that it's really hard not to think that every individual matters and that collectively a community does have power to shape what comes next. So we're going to have a chat about power today. Are you up for that?
Yeah.
Right. So how this is going to happen is I'm going to have a conversation with some guests that break down this barrier between the past and the present. One of our guests is a woman named Lisa Jardine, who was very much involved in the fight for the kite before the Grafton Centre was developed. Lisa is no longer living at present, and so a wonderful actress is embodying Lisa and helping us to understand Lisa and her history and her involvement today. And Zhu Zhang, who is a part of the Cambridge Room, is going to be talking about community power in the context of the built environment today. So we're going to do a little bit of a conversation with our special guests, and then we're going to be breaking out into tables. And I know a lot of you have stories to share. Each table has a conversation leader at it, or Zhang and I will also be conversation leaders, so we will be sat at your table. So we'll have a group conversation, and then we'll have smaller group conversations, and then we'll come back to the bigger group conversation. Okay? All right. So the topic of power, here we go. Right. Lisa, it's wonderful that you were able to join us. Thank you for asking me. We feel very privileged that you could be there. I know you're very, very loved by a lot of people that we've been having conversations with. Your name has come up so frequently. I'm wondering, before we even talk about your time at Jesus College, before we talk about the kite development, could you tell us just a bit about yourself and your background? How did you end up in Cambridge?
Well, it's quite interesting because a lot of people assume I'm from a privileged background, but in fact, I was born in 1944 in a very humble home with an outdoor loo and only cold running water. We didn't have much money. We didn't have much at all, but it was a very intellectual background. My father was a mathematician and a scientist. My mother was a sculptor. So it was also a slightly bohemian background. And all their friends were of a similar nature. They had intellectual bohemian friends. And I grew up accepting that as being all. So that has been my background. And I was a bit of a child prodigy in that I could play chess with my father when I was 4 years old.
Oh my gosh, I still don't know how to do that.
And I was nurtured in mathematics. It was always assumed I was going to be a mathematician. So I did very well. Everything I did as a child, I loved. But my mother taught me things like cooking and knitting and play the guitar. And I always thought they were slightly inferior to mathematics. I learned later that they are just as skillful. Every skill is important. But I was nurtured as a mathematician. And I won a scholarship to Cheltenham Ladies College, which absolutely endorsed that whole image of mathematics. It was mathematics-based. But I also learned lots of things at the college. It gave me a love of chamber music, a love of singing. I learned to play tennis. So I was able to keep fit at last because I had been a slightly overweight child. But yes, so I stayed on at Cheltenham's Ladies' College, and I did my A-levels there, and I didn't do as well as I expected. I thought I'd fly away and wanted to apply to Cambridge. But I got a B in the mathematics. Horror of horror for me. It was never expected. So I couldn't take the entrance exam for Cambridge. So I was tutored for a year in mathematics, and then came to Cambridge Newnham College the following year. And I did mathematics for 2 years before I had a slight crisis of confidence, and then which led me to change into English. I finished my degree in English. And the reason for that crisis of confidence was because I was told in no uncertain terms that however good I was, I would never be as good as a man in mathematics.
Well, certainly I was thinking with mathematics, it wasn't the time that women taught red legs. No.
So I changed to English, and then I did an MA at Essex, and then I came back to Cambridge to do a PhD. And since then I've taught, basically. Teaching is my passion. I just want to pass on any knowledge, and I want people to share knowledge. I think that's so important. So I taught various places, Warburg Institute, Cornell University, at King's, and then got a fellowship in 1976 at Jesus College. And that's where all this took off. But there's a lovely story about the beginnings of my time at Jesus College, because it was 1976, the inauguration ceremony, if that's what it's called, took place on the 3rd of October, and I gave birth on the 6th of October. And I was praying all through that ceremony that my waters were boiling. So I had a young child as well at that time. I already had one son, who at that time was 6 years old, but I had my second at that time. And then the whole thing took off. But the whole Kite scenario had been going on for a long time.
So before we jump into that, just to reflect on some of the things that you said, and knowing that the topic of this conversation is power, wow, it seemed as though there was something really powerful about your belief in your capabilities.
I think that was nurtured in me from my father, right from the word go. He was very strong in his beliefs that I could do it, and he taught me. And I was the eldest of 4 girls, and he, let's face it, like so many people at that time wanted a son, and so I was almost taught as the son. I was nurtured in that way. All the girls were favoured in their different ways, but because I was the eldest, I think I was given that extra tuition, extra push. It was always believed that I was going to be a mathematician. My father, even a little story, he said, "You're not going to learn to run like a girl. You are going to run like boys. Girls flap their arms all over the place. You are going to..." But so little things. He taught me to do things like a boy, but I was totally accepted in their intellectual circles.
Brilliant. And so then how did your career progress at Cambridge? I mean, it does sound like you tried to pass some of the same nurturing knowledge is power, believe in yourself mindset on to others.
Absolutely. I have a passion for teaching. I have a passion for learning. I think, if anything, I think I just want to go on learning for the rest of my life. But I think passing that on is so important. And I've always told my students, if you want to do something, just do it. Don't hold back. Just do it. Be fearless. Be fearless, even if it's in a man's world. Just go for it. And I think that's so important. Just believe it. It was quite interesting because, again, at Jesus, I was given the task of mothering. They give the fellows a group of students to mother, if you like. to look after the needs. And so I was asked to look after lots of female students. And I was given this position. All the fellows get given something similar. But my first 4 students that came to see me were all young men. So I don't know, I think I had an open book.
And got it. And I mean, at Jesus, you were a first.
I was the first female fellow, yes, absolutely, which was an honor or a privilege, but it was about time.
Absolutely, sir. Now, your work in Cambridge was not confined to Jesus College alone in any way, shape, or form, was it?
No.
So what else did you get involved? Could you tell us?
Well, this was where the Kite came. The area of the Kite had been put up for redevelopment for 20 years. I mean, it started in the 50s. There was the Holford report in 1950, in which it was recommended that the Kite become a shopping centre to ease the pressure on the city, on the old city. In 1959, the university repeated this and said that the Kite needed complete regeneration and redevelopment. And that went on into the 60s. That numerous proposals were put forward. And at the same time, the Arbory estate was being built, and people were being moved out from the Kite area into the Arbory, where there were no facilities at all. And the Kite area was amazing. It had everything. There were, at one point in the Kite, there were over 100 shops. Another point, I think it was a bit further back, but there had been 49 pubs. There was everything you ever wanted in the Kite. There were furniture makers, there were funeral parlours, there were schools, there were chapels, there were music shops, there were florists, there was a denture repair maker. There was just about everything you needed in the Kite. It was a total little town on its own. And the powers that be decided that it was a good idea to put a regional shopping centre in the middle of this area, demolish lots of houses, put a regional shopping centre and 3 huge car parks. Initially, they wanted to put car parking for 10,000 cars. That was reduced, but 10,000 cars. I mean, any community where you put that in.
Quite, and at the time, am I right, there were about 70,000, 80,000 people living in Cambridge, and 10,000 parking spaces.
They wanted it to become a regional shopping centre, which was just amazing. Just the whole idea of it is amazing. I mean, they did put forward all kinds of amazing schemes. One of them was to redevelop Christ's Pieces, which of course was never good. Another one was to put a road tunnel going from Maid's Causeway right under New Square coming out at East Road. And again, that was dismissed. But there were lots of different schemes put forward, all of which the university generally dismissed, and the city council at the time. So eventually, a scheme was proposed, and the Conservative Council, which came in 1976, accepted it and started really ratcheting forward.
And so at that point, you became really heavily involved in trying to fight that proposal, but also, I think, shaping alternative ideas, alternative visions for what.
Absolutely. Well, there was a Kite coordinating council which had been formed before I came along, but I became its spokesperson, and the Kite Community Action, because it had to be about action, not just talking, right? And so we actually proposed alternatives. In 1976, the KCA brought out a book, A Gradual Renewal of the Kite, which contained blueprints which were amazing, architectural drawings, historical notes, all as an alternative vision for redeveloping the Kite with more housing, small shops, not this huge regional area. They did recognise that certain areas would have to disappear, certain streets, but it was going to concentrate on the community, the housing, the local needs, not on the regional centre. And that's what they proposed. But it didn't go forward. They really tried to push for it. A few years later, even in 1980, that they went down to London and spoke to the Housing Renewals Unit, and tried to get alternative applications put through for a complete different way of looking at the redevelopment of the Kite. Again, with more housing, they wanted potentially an ice rink, they thought. But they did not want huge shops and huge parking allotments. So, yes, they tried all kinds of things.
And I know you and the Kite Community Forum were quite inventive in some of the tactics that you used. I think people might be really interested in knowing.
Well, as that. A small group of us, myself and there were other dons and townspeople, managed to buy one of the properties on Fitzroy Street. For some strange reason, the council had, as an oversight, they had somehow let the compulsory purchase scheme drop. So we were able to buy this number 56 Fitzroy Street, and at that time they couldn't purchase it back. They had to put in an application, which was at that time expected to take years. So we thought, we'll buy this number 56, but we had to run it as a shop. So that was an official request. So that was part of the lease. And we sold about, I think, half a dozen, maybe 10 different grocery outlets, buy eggs, blitzers. But it wasn't a big shop. And we published pamphlets and things there as well. But we also had, for a little while, we had a campaign hub at the Little Kettles Cafe. I expect some people will remember the Little Kettles Cafe. But one day we came along and it had been boarded up by the council. Despite that, saying unsafe, trespassers will be prosecuted. And despite the fact that we had had 3 reports of our own to say that it should be safe to use. So the council did this. They came along and they cut off services to some of the properties. They boarded places up. Squatters had moved in to empty properties because by this time, as I say, people had been moved out to the Arbory. Properties had been allowed to go derelict, which was tragic because they could have been repaired, they could have been reinstated. But sadly, there was by this time, by the late 70s, there were so many demolished areas that it was beginning to look a bit like a war zone, and sort of in a way the writing was on the wall. But we wanted to fight back. We wanted to get the scheme changed as much as possible to fit local needs. I think we knew it really was going to happen at some point, but we really wanted to fight it for as long as possible so that we could get community involved in decision making.
Yeah.
And that was a real problem.
I think it's so interesting going back to the topic of power. And I think looking back on what happened, you lost a battle, but here we are in 2025, and people are quite inspired by this story. And there's a very strong living memory of it because we've been hearing this story from hundreds of people. And I know people in this room were also very involved in the fight for the Kite and also the development of alternative ideas for what it could be. Which brings me to Zhizhang, if I could do. And I know that one of your passions, obviously, is trying to build community power, and in particular in relationship to the built environment.
Yes.
I'm wondering if, before we go into your day job, could you tell us a little bit about your story and how you came to Cambridge and a bit about your passions as well?
Yeah, of course. It's just very emotional and extraordinary stories. I'm still in that in the 70s. Well, hi everyone. I'm Zhuo Zhang. So I work as a postdoctoral research associate at Cambridge Room. But before Cambridge, I was teaching at different universities in the UK. I did my PhD not in Cambridge, in Liverpool. And my PhD was about Hong Kong and grassroots urbanism in Hong Kong. Anyone been to Hong Kong before? And that's, yeah, for those of you not, or for you have been to, I mean, probably you have known the high-rise buildings, the financial towers. But apart from that, you also know the street markets in the old neighborhood, the rooftop housing, like they built by themselves in the old neighborhood buildings, and all the domestic workers every Sunday occupy the whole street just having fun and eating and meeting friends. So for me, what I'm really interested, I mean, for my PhD and my research in general is how the city is being built and being made, but not only by the planners or architects, but by the local residents. In that sense, that's why I have this huge passion of urban history, but not the grand narrative or the structured history by one certain party, by the authority, by the government, but the history of everyday life, of how people live in the city and transform the city. I think that's something really I've been really interesting in the sense, I mean, today we're talking the power. And I think, remember in 2020, during my PhD, I did one residency workshop at Kite Liverpool. It was called Knowledge is Power. And in the sense, we all know planners, architects have the knowledge of how to build a city. As they are very aware, they have the knowledge of how to build a city and plan the city. But at the same time, if for us, for the local residents who live in the city, who walk in the street every day, you also have your own visions, your own opinions of the city. If the people in Hong Kong can build the street market, can build the rooftop housing by themselves, can change the city landscape by themselves, then they also have the power. So for me, I think that's something for my research in general. I'm really interested in this kind of dynamics of power in the city making. Yeah.
Is there anything in particular, because I know you've been involved in this project from the inception, and obviously you've just sat and you've heard some of Lisa's story as well. Is there anything about the history of the Kite and what happened in the 1970s and what's happening today in terms of the redevelopment and the creation of the life science quarter here that inspires you or that you'd like to reflect on?
Yeah, I just want to say, like, for me, it's a huge honor to have this conversation with across time with Lisa, because you were the first female fellow at the college. I'm also a member of Jesus. I remember the first day when I went to the college, I saw your portrait with the red hair.
Oh yes, in Lennox days.
And your picture was in the middle of the dining hall among a group of other portraits of male professors, fellow masters. And I was just thinking it's just so cool and extraordinary there. I wanted to know more about you. I think from your own story, it's kind of two-part probably. First is, I mean, you're a researcher. I think for your research, you are an expert in Renaissance. And absolutely, many scholars mention that you have rewritten the whole European intellectual life in the 16th, 17th century. And for me, that's really something like, and then connected with your action in the way of, like when you will say rewriting the history, it's not kind of having another history. It's challenge that singular dominant view. It's bring new perspectives. Maybe it's perspective from community, a perspective from other parts, but bring that to the table, to this knowledge production. And obviously the Kite Action Group, it's really interesting because the group itself, you are part of the group, and then you also have other fellows, journalists, and also working class people and artisans, students. It's quite mixed. Like today, this room is a mixture of people gathered together, sitting there, and then discuss the future of the Kite, future of Cambridge. So that's really interesting in the way. Also, I was talking with your husband, John. So for John has, he studies
Architects. Yeah. He knew all about this.
So I think John studied architecture in the department in the late 70s, and he also mentioned the whole action group also had this kind of regular civil conversation and relationship with developer, with city council. It was, and on the other hand, all of you had this strong resistance and pressure put on the development. That's why Grafton is half the size of original plan.
Original.
Yeah. So it's really interesting complexities there. And for me, if we're talking about community power, community can make the change if you have this platform. And it can make the change if your voice being heard, if you're going back to the knowledge, if your knowledge being expressed, if you're being respected, I think that's something really, yeah.
There's something about the respect and developing the trust as an ingredient in power, isn't there? Or being able to share power. Yeah. Which, Zhuzhang, I think this is the moment then. I think one of the reasons the Cambridge Room and Together Culture have been working really closely together is that we're finally now going to be neighbors, right? So you've got that. So the Cambridge Room is going to be opening in the Grafton Centre very shortly.
Well, yeah, hoping less than a month.
Yeah, could you explain to everybody what the Cambridge Room is and when it's going to be open?
Yes, of course. Or for those you maybe haven't heard of Cambridge Room. So Cambridge Room, it's part of the Urban Room network in the UK. So Urban Room is the concept by one architect, Terry Farrell. He said every city should have a space where architects and local residents can sit together, discuss the future of the city. And in Newcastle, you have Farrell Center, and in Sheffield, you have Legworks, actually set up by Professor Flora Samuel, 11 years ago, and it's still running today. And when Flora came to the Department of Architecture, became the head of department, she set up the Cambridge Room. And it's this vision of widened participation, public participation in planning in Cambridge and also surrounding areas. So we are part of the department, but also we are a charity, and we work with not just scholars, but also Cambridge Association of Architects. We have more than 20 local advisory group members. Together Culture is one of them, and charities, community groups, and culture organizations, also college members as well. So it's been going back to that conversation and connection. Maybe it's going to be fights, conflicts, but let's sit together, let's argue through it. I think that's yeah. And we are opening very, very soon. If you're passing Grafton later today, you will see a unit with our banner, Cambridge Room there. It's actually the QR code you can scan, have a look at our website. Yeah.
In the front, just by girls, right?
Yeah.
Extra girls.
Yeah. And also, I mean, it's just a pop-up space, just trying to really test the idea. And also, one thing I have done is created this exhibition for the opening of the pop-up space. And one key element, it is about community activism, the timeline of community activism in Cambridge since 1927. So you will find the story of Kite on that timeline. You also find Cambridge Junction, which was an outcome of the Venue Action Group in Cambridge. And you also find other active groups like Transition Cambridge, Cambridge Donut Economy, and Carbon Footprint, Museum of Cambridge with the whole Capturing Cambridge project. So it's really, and also it's really a collective mapping of what's been happening in Cambridge, and also outside Cambridge. Because if you notice, I mentioned Urban Room Network, but we removed the term urban. We call Cambridge Room because in Cambridge it's more than a city center. If we're talking planning, development, it's about even Peterworth, or all the Hill, even it's not really in Cambridgeshire, but people living there and then work in this city. So it's really a broader scope of really understand what's the issues, what's really people's opinions or visions of this city. And everyone will be welcome to read your projects or your knowledge of what's going on, what happened in Cambridge. Yeah.
That's such a good segue. Before we break into conversations about power within our groups around the table, does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask Zhuzhang or Lisa? Anything bubbling up for you? You're reflecting.
You knew Lisa.
I'm so sorry, I couldn't quite hear you.
Oh, sorry. Can I ask Lisa if you knew Lisa?
No.
I was quite kind of.
Yes, I understand. Yes.
She was a very remarkable woman.
Yes.
Not.
I'd let her husband.
Well, she had said.
Two. She had two. But yes,
Has a degree, of course, in mathematics and English, and is a very distinguished writer. One particularly.
I've heard
such.
Yes, I heard her lectures.
Great. I know so many of you have stories to share as well, and we'll make sure that there's space to do that throughout the weekend. Okay. Before I let the two of you go, the last question for both of you was 100 years from now. Lisa, I know you're You have to go backwards to go forwards. But what was your dream for Cambridge in 100 years? If you had a crystal ball, where do you think things would have moved on to?
I'd like to see more interaction between the university and the town and the town's people. I think that the university does tend to keep itself a little bit aloof, no matter what it says. And I think I'd like them to share their knowledge. They have so much that is positive, and knowledge is power, as we have said. And I think more than anything, if people were more equal in their knowledge, in their learning, I think there would be less conflict. I would think there would be less antagonism. I think there would be more understanding throughout Cambridge, throughout the town, everywhere. I think they need to share their learning a lot more.
Yeah. And the learning that can come from people with different types of education and knowledge, making it a reciprocal thing, I should imagine, as well. Yeah. Xusheng.
I agree. Like share, like really listening and sharing. And I think some people would say town and gone. Some people say town versus gone. Some people would actually say old versus new, or urban versus nature. But I think it's really that idea of respecting each other, and the university sharing resources. Also for us, we also need to share we have this platform, or to fight for that platform to express our opinions, our visions. And as also, if we are talking 100 years or the future of Cambridge, probably one thing is really we also need to listen to the future, the people who are going to be the future of the city, the children, young people, to listen their vision, listen their voice as well. Yeah.
That's right.
Yes, I have to say I arrived late, so I've missed all the preamble. I live in the flats at the back of the Grafton Centre. Right. My husband was an original occupant of those flats. He's deceased. He didn't even like to go to Oxford. He said, "Why go to Oxford? I live in Cambridge." And I share his feeling. I've lived here since 1990, and I chose to come to live in Cambridge because it was such an exquisitely beautiful place to live. It was peaceful. It was polite. It was well cared for. And in the future, I would hope that we could shed for and against connotations and be together and work on reestablishing civility and kindness, awareness of our neighbors, helpfulness, politeness. And because the Kite is such an old, important part of this city, it's a wonderful area to be sort of a spearhead for a renaissance of good human behavior. That's what I would like to see.
Nice. Here. So what I've been hearing in terms of power in the conversation that we've been having is there is absolutely something in the power of sharing stories and experiences, power of sharing knowledge. There's something in the power of coming together in, I'll take your word, a civil fashion. I'm hearing a lot as there being a lot of power in listening, power in being open-minded, a power in getting beyond barriers in our own minds and thinking about things that don't exist yet, different ways that things could possibly be. And I was also hearing that there's a power in connection where we build respect and where we build some bonds and some form of trust so that we can get beyond us and them versus one or the other thingy, and be thinking about something a bit more holistic, something a bit more like an ecosystem.